Look, folks, it's been a while since we've had the Good Report, but my favorite congressman, Representative Bob Good, is joining us today. Bob, welcome to The Awakening. Glad to have you back. And, man, you're doing a great job up there. What do we as citizens need to be concerned about today? I've got a couple of questions for you, but what's on your mind?
Well, great to be with you again, Bishop Jackson. And, you know, it's terrible that we are in a situation where you've got to clarify what you clarified a moment ago. You know, that is encompassing much of the battle across our country here on Capitol Hill is basic fundamental truths, not only biblical truths, but scientific truth, like the science of sex and gender, and the ridiculous assertion by the left and the determination by the left that folks get to choose their gender and deny the science of that. And we can just see how the problems that are they're emanating from that across the country. And so it's just incredible that we have to combat that. I'm combating that on a regular basis here, particularly on the Education and Workforce Committee on which I serve. We're combating it in our NDAA, our military spending. We're combating it on the money that we're borrowing to send overseas to try to force this kind of ideology and support it across the sea to other countries. So, but thank you for fighting for truth, and thanks for having me with you again.
Well, look, let me ask you right off the bat then, how are Republicans responding? I pretty much know how Democrats are going to respond. How are Republicans responding to the fact that the IRS showed up at Matt Taibbi's door on the same day he was scheduled to testify? Just a coincidence, I'm sure.
Yeah, I was talking with Judiciary Chairman Jim Jordan about that yesterday evening. He was talking with us about that in a House Freedom Caucus meeting. And it's just the loss of trust and confidence and faith on behalf of the American people in our once sacred institutions, in our federal government, our federal law enforcement, our Department of Justice, the IRS, if we ever had any faith and trust in that. But the coincidence that on the day that he is taking action to expose what's happening in our government, we've got on that very same day the IRS showing up on his doorstep, frankly, a weaponized IRS. One of the things, Bishop Jackson, you probably know about this, but one of the spending cuts that we have proposed and we're determined to get through is to rescind the $80 billion to expand the IRS, to hire that additional 87,000 IRS agents who could never be kept busy going after the limited numbers of millionaires and billionaires that are so demonized by this administration, the Democrat Party. And we know they will be turned against regular income Americans, middle-class Americans who are audited already at 5 times the rate wealthy Americans are anyway, because they don't have the tax lawyers and the tax accountants to fight it, and they just comply and surrender because they have to. They don't have the resources to combat it. But you know, we've got to continue to take on and fight back against what we run against, the weaponization of the federal government against its own citizens. I commend the Speaker for commissioning that select committee on the weaponization and turning them loose to go after the administration in that respect.
By the way, I don't think I've said this publicly, at least not here on the radio program, to you, but we owe you a great debt of thanks for the very principled stand you took during the election for Speaker in making sure that we were going to have some accountability and really some agenda integrity. And I'll tell you, I think if it weren't for you, we might be looking at a very different house right now for you and a few others who stood with you. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you, Bishop, and thank you to my colleagues who stood with me. We are better for it as a conference, as a Congress, and a country. You don't always want to repeat the things that are most valuable, and the difficult times are what tend to produce the fruit that remains as a biblical principle, as you know. But the things that we have changed in terms of how Congress operates, regular order with amendments and working through committee and, you know, have to have a majority to pass legislation and those sorts of minimum time to read legislation, not being able to pass massive omnibus spending bills like we did last December. Those kind of things will give us the opportunity to make change with regard to the spending battle, the debt ceiling fight in the days and weeks ahead here, not to mention the resolve that's been demonstrated because of what we did historically, voting 14 times against our presumptive leader of our own party. But that empowers now Speaker McCarthy to tell the Senate and the President that, doggone it, we mean business. This is a new House. This is not yesterday's Republican majority. This is not the Republicans of the failures of the surrenders of the past. But when these folks mean no, they mean no.
You are the only person I've heard publicly say, now I'm not saying others haven't, but publicly say that we need to be looking at impeaching this president. And now we've gotten a lot more information about the transactions and the money flow between the Chinese Communist Party and the Biden family. How are people looking at him in light of what he's doing or not doing with regard to our policies toward China? And are we looking at a president, frankly, who is compromised?
Absolutely on the last part of that. And I would just encourage our listeners that to make their voices heard to their elected representatives across the country if they think the president should be impeached. I would submit he deserves to be impeached or he warrants impeachment for three reasons. You touched on a couple of them. Number one, the 6 million illegals he has facilitated across the southern border, facilitating an invasion. I'll stop there and not expound upon that. But number one, the border invasion. How do we let that continue for 2 more years? Number two, his unconstitutional actions that he has said were unconstitutional, and he did them anyway. With the eviction moratorium, with the trying to transfer student loan debt to those who did not incur it. He knew that he couldn't have authority to do that and did it anyway. But then thirdly, the Biden crime family. I think he is so compromised, he and his family, with their actions as it relates to Ukraine. Family makes millions of dollars off Ukraine relationship, and then we send $100 billion to Ukraine. What's the connection there? Family makes millions of dollars off relationships in China, and then we treat them as a competitor instead of an adversary. We will not hold them accountable or challenge them in this administration. That connection there. So I commend Jamie Comer and the House Oversight Committee and Jim Jordan and the Judiciary Committee and Speaker McCarthy for empowering them to investigate those things, and hopefully they will turn up truth. The evidence that's what we want. Evidence, we want truth, and then we will be able to act accordingly, not just now with the House majority, but in the next administration, hopefully with the president and the Senate majority as well, to take action on those, whatever is uncovered.
What's the priority now? What should the public be looking for? Your constituents, the American people, what should they be looking for, paying attention to as the House moves forward with its agenda?
I would point, number one, to our primary responsibility, which is the power of the purse. All spending is supposed to originate at the House. We have the responsibility of protecting the full faith and credit of the U.S. government, our ability to borrow, our ability to pay our debts, and those sorts of things. That is being threatened right now by the reckless, unprecedented spending that's given us $32 trillion in national debt, nearly $100,000 per citizen. The president has proposed a new budget of an unprecedented $7 trillion, about $20,000 in new spending per American citizen. And we are united at this point. The Speaker is supporting the House Freedom Caucus position that we've put out to make meaningful spending cuts in return for negotiating the debt ceiling increase. But then more than that, as we look to the fall when the funding of this government expires and we have to have the new funding mechanism in place, that we're going to put real spending reforms in place. We're going to utilize our newfound leverage in the House Freedom Caucus, the newfound influence that we have in this Congress as the conservative conscience of the Republican House membership. But the spending fight is paramount because we're not going to continue to fight the very government, the weaponization of the government against the citizens, the wokeness of our government that's oppressing our citizens, that we campaign against. We are committed to defunding that in this Congress and to striking a blow against this terrible swamp establishment here that we all are suffering under in this country.
Are we going to be able to undo the damage that's being done by the open borders policy of this administration? Because I can't, it's hard for me to figure out how in the world you ever undo this.
You're exactly right. Irreparable harm has been done. The over 1 million gotaways, the 6 million that I mentioned, that's the facilitated ones. That's the ones that they surrender to us for free health care, free education, free social services, free travel, free phones, free hotel stays, all the rest. They've surrendered, been taken into custody essentially by our country under this president's policies. But then there's the million, incalculable number, a million. It's just really hard to conceive the million who did not want to take that because their criminal ties, their terrorist ties, what they're trafficking into our country in terms of drugs and human trafficking, sex trafficking, child trafficking, and so forth. And irreparable harm has been done by that. Once we seal the border, once we take control of the border, hopefully in this Congress, it may be as far away as when we get the White House back in the Senate. But once we seal the border, then we will begin to find out who is in the country and what their intentions are, and it is irreparable harm.
Look, I know that you're running for re-election. what's the website? Where do people go to try to support you, and how's the election looking?
Well, thank you, Bishop Jackson. It's good.house.gov to follow me in my official capacity, bobgoodforcongress.com on the political side, but certainly welcome all folks to go to those sites and to register with us and to follow us and what we're doing.